Yes, he said, I agree. He proceeded, I know nothing and can understand nothing of any other of those wise causes which are alleged. And if a person says to me that the bloom of color or form or any such thing is a source of beauty, I leave all that, which is only confusing to me, and simply and singly, and perhaps foolishly, hold and am assured in my own mind that nothing makes a thing beautiful but the presence and participation of beauty in whatever way of or manner obtained. For as to the manner I am uncertain, but I stoutly contend that by beauty all beautiful things become beautiful. This appears to me to be the safest answer which I can give, either to myself or to another, and to this I cling, in the persuasion that this principle will never be overthrown, and that to myself or to any one who asks that question, I may safely reply that by beauty, beautiful things become beautiful. Do you not agree with me? I do. And that by greatness, only great things become great and greater, and by smallness, the less become less. True. Then, if a person were to remark that A is taller by a head than B, and B less by a head than A, you would refuse to admit this statement and would stoutly contend that what you mean is only that the greater is greater by and by reason of greatness, and the less is less only by and by reason of smallness. And thus you would avoid the danger of saying that the greater is greater and the less less by the measure of the head, which is the same in both, and would also avoid the monstrous absurdity of supposing that the greater man is greater by reason of the head, which is small. You would be afraid to draw such an inference, would you not? Indeed, I should, said Cebes, laughing. In like manner you would be afraid to say that 10 exceeded 8 by and by reason of 2, but would say by and by reason of number. Or you would say that 2 cubits exceed 1 cubit not by a half, but by magnitude, for there is the same liability to error in all these cases. Very true, he said. Again, would you not be cautious of affirming that the addition of 1 to 1 or the division of 1 is the cause of 2? And you would loudly asseverate that you know of no way in which anything comes into existence except by participation in its own proper essence, and consequently, as far as you know, the only cause of two is the participation in duality. This is the way to make two, and the participation in one is the way to make one. You would say, I will let alone puzzles of division and addition. Wiser heads than mine may answer them. Inexperienced as I am, I really and ready to start, as the proverb says, at my own shadow. I cannot afford to give up the sure ground of a principle, as if anyone assails you there, you would not mind him, or answer him, until you have seen whether the consequences which follow agree with one another or not, and when you are further required to give an explanation of this principle, you would go on and to assume a higher principle and a higher until you found a resting place in the best of the higher. But you would not confuse the principle and the consequences in your reasoning, like the heuristics. At least if you wanted to discover real existence. Not that this confusion signifies to them who never care or think about the matter at all, for they have the wit to be well pleased with themselves, however great may be the turmoil of their ideas. But you, if you are a philosopher, will certainly do as I say. What you say is most true, said Simmias and Cebes, both speaking at once. Echecrates, yes, Phaedo, and I do not wonder at their assenting. Anyone who has the least sense will acknowledge the wonderful clearness of Socrates' reasoning. Phaedo, certainly. Echecrates, and such was the feeling of the whole company at that time. Echecrates, yes, and equally of ourselves who were not of the company and are now listening to your recital. But what followed? Phaedo, after all this had been admitted, and they had agreed that ideas exist, and that other things participate in them and derive their names from them, Socrates, if I remember rightly, said, "This is your way of speaking. And yet, when you say that Simmias is greater than Socrates and less than Phaedo, do you not predicate of Simmias both greatness and smallness?" "Yes, I do." "But still you allow that Simmias does not really exceed Socrates, as the words may seem to imply, because he is Simmias, but by reason of the size which he has, just as Simmias does not exceed Socrates because he is Simmias, any more than because Socrates is Socrates, but because he has smallness when compared with the greatness of Simmias?" True. And if Phaedo exceeds him in size, this is not because Phaedo is Phaedo, but because Phaedo has greatness relatively to Simmias, who is comparatively smaller. That is true, and therefore Simmias is said to be great, and is also said to be small, because he is in a mean between them, exceeding the smallness of the one by his greatness, and allowing the greatness of the other to exceed his smallness. He added, laughing, "I am speaking like a book, but I believe that what I am saying is true." Simmias assented. "I speak as I do because I want you to agree with me in thinking not only that absolute greatness will never be great and also small, but that greatness in us or in the concrete will never admit the small or admit of being exceeded. Instead of this, one of two things will happen. Either the greater will fly or retire before the opposite, which is the less, or at the approach of the less has already ceased to exist, but will not, if allowing or admitting of smallness, be changed by that, even as I, having received and admitted the smallness when compared with Simmias, remain just as I was, and am the same small person, and as the idea of greatness cannot condescend ever to be or become small, in like manner the smallness in us cannot be or become great, nor can any other opposite which remains the same ever be or become its own opposite, but either passes away or perishes in the change. That, replied Cebes, is quite my notion. Hereupon one of the company, though I do not exactly remember which of them, said, in heaven's name, is not this the direct contrary of what was admitted before, that out of the greater came the less, and out of the less the greater, and that opposites were simply generated from opposites? But now this principle seems to be utterly denied. Socrates inclined his head to the speaker and listened. I like your courage, he said, in reminding us of this, but you do not observe that there is a difference in the two cases. For then we were speaking of opposites in the concrete, and now of the essential opposite, which, as is affirmed, neither in us nor in nature can ever be at variance with itself. Then, my friend, we were speaking of things in which opposites are inherent and which are called after them, but now about the opposites which are inherent in them and which give their name to them. And these essential opposites will never, as we maintain, admit of generation into or out of one another. At the same time, turning to Cebes, he said, are you at all disconcerted, Cebes, at our friend's objection? No, I do not feel so, said Cebes, and yet I cannot deny that I am often disturbed by objections. Then we are agreed, after all, said Socrates, that the opposite will never in any case be opposed to itself. To that we are quite agreed, he replied. Yet once more let me ask you to consider the question from another point of view, and see whether you agree with me. There is a thing which you term heat, and another thing which you term cold. Certainly. But are they the same as fire and snow? Most assuredly not. Heat is a thing different from fire, and cold is not the same with snow? Yes, and yet you will surely admit that when snow, as was before said, is under the influence of heat, they will not remain snow and heat, but at the advance of the heat, the snow will either retire or perish. Very true, he replied, and the fire, too, at the advance of the cold, will either retire or perish. And when the fire is under the influence of the cold, they will not remain as before, fire and cold. That is true, he said, and in some cases the name of the idea is not only attached to the idea in an eternal connection, but anything else which, not being the idea, exists only in the form of the idea, may also lay claim to it. I will try to make this clearer by an example. The odd number is always called by the name of odd. Very true. But is this the only thing which is called odd? Are there not other things which have their own name and yet are called odd? Because although not the same as oddness, they are never without oddness? That is what I mean to ask, whether numbers such as the number 3 are not of the class of odd. And there are many other examples. Would you not say, for example, that 3 may be called by its proper name and also be called odd, which is not the same with 3? And this may be said not only of 3, but also of 5, and of every alternate number. Each of them, without being oddness, is odd, and is thus in the same way 2 and 4 and the other series of alternate numbers. Has every number even without being evenness? Do you agree? Of course. Then now mark the point at which I am aiming. Not only do essential opposites exclude one another, but also concrete things which, although not in themselves opposed, contain opposites. This, I say, likewise reject the idea which is opposed to that which is contained in them, and when it approaches them, they either perish or withdraw. For example, will not the number 3 endure annihilation or anything sooner than be converted into an even number while remaining 3? Very true, said Sebas. And yet, he said, the number 2 is certainly not opposed to the number 3. It is not. Then not only do opposite ideas repel the advance of one another, but also there are other natures which repel the approach of opposites. Very true, he said. Suppose, he said, that we endeavor, if possible, to determine what these are. By all means. Are they not, Sebas, such as compel the things of which they have possession, not only to take their own form, but also the form of some opposite? What do you mean? I mean, as I was just now saying, and as I am sure that you know, that those things which are possessed by the number 3 must not only be true 3 in number, but must be also odd, quite true, and on this oddness of which the number 3 has the impress, the opposite idea will never intrude? No. And this impress was given by the odd principle? Yes. And to the odd is opposed the even? True. Then the idea of the even number will never arrive at 3? No. Then 3 has no part in the even? None. Then the triad or number 3 is uneven? Very true. To return then to my distinction of natures which are not opposed, and yet do not admit opposites, as in the instance given, 3, although not opposed to the even, does not any the more admit of the even, but always brings the opposite into play on the other side, or as 2 does not receive the earth or fire the cold, from these examples, and there are many more of them. Perhaps you may be able to arrive at the general conclusion that not only opposites will not receive opposites, but also that nothing which brings the opposite will admit the opposite of that which it brings, in that to which it is brought. And here let me recapitulate, for there is no harm in repetition. The number 5 will not admit the nature of the even any more than then, which is the double of 5, will admit the nature of the oath. The double has another opposite and is not strictly opposed to the oath, but nevertheless rejects the oath altogether, nor again will part in the ratio 3 to 2, nor any fraction in which there is a half, nor again in which there is a third, admit the notion of the whole, although they are not opposed to the whole. You will agree? Yes, he said, I entirely agree and go along with you in that. And now, he said, let us begin again, and do not you answer my question in the words in which I ask it. Let me have not the old safe answer of which I spoke at first, but another equally safe, of which the truth will be inferred by you from what has been just said. I mean that if anyone asks you what that is of which the inference makes the body hot, you will reply, not heat. This is what I call the safe and stupid answer, but fire, a far superior answer, which we are now in a condition to give. Or if anyone asks you why a body is diseased, you will not say from disease, but from fever, and instead of saying that oddness is the cause of odd numbers, you will say that the monad is the cause of them, and so of things in general, as I dare say that you will understand sufficiently without my adducing any further examples. Yes, he said, I quite understand you. Tell me, then, what is that of which the ignorance will render the body alive? The soul, he replied. And is this always the case? Yes, he said, of course. Then, whatever the soul possesses, to that she comes bearing life? Yes, certainly. And is there any opposite to life? There is, he said. And what is that? That then the soul, as has been acknowledged, will never receive the opposite of what she brings. Impossible, replied Cebes. And now, he said, what did we just now call that principle which repels the even? the odd, and that principle which repels the musical or the just, the unmusical, he said, and the unjust. And what do we call that principle which does not admit of that? The immortal, he said. And does the soul admit of that? No. Then the soul is immortal? Yes, he said. And may we say that this has been proven? Yes, abundantly proven, Socrates, he replied. Yes, abundantly proven, Socrates, he replied. Supposing that the oath were imperishable, must not three be imperishable? Of course. And if that which is cold were imperishable, when the warm principle came attacking the snow, must not the snow have retired the whole and unmelted? For it could never have perished, nor could it have remained unadmitted the heat. True, he said. Again, if the uncooling or warm principle were imperishable, the fire when assailed by cold would not have perished or have been extinguished, but would have gone away unaffected. Certainly, he said. And the same may be said of the immortal. If the immortal is also imperishable, the soul, when attacked by death, cannot perish. For the preceding argument shows that the soul will not admit of death, or ever be death, any more than three or the odd number will admit of the even, or fire, or the heat in the fire of the cold. Yet a person may say, but also the oath will not become even at the approach of the even. Why may not the oath perish and the even take the place of the oath? Now to him who makes this objection, we cannot answer that the oath principle is imperishable, for this has not been acknowledged. But if this had been acknowledged, there would have been no difficulty in contending that at the approach of the even, the odd principle and the number three took their departure, and the same argument would have held good of fire and heat and any other thing. Very true. And the same may be said of the immortal. If the immortal is also imperishable, then the soul will be imperishable as well as immortal. But if not, some other proof of her imperishableness will have to be given. No other proof is needed, he said, for if the immortal, being eternal, is liable to perish, then nothing is imperishable. Yes, replied Socrates, and yet all men will agree that God and the essential form of life and the immortal in general will never perish. Yes, all men, he said, that is true, and what is more, cats, if I am not mistaken, as well as men. Seeing then that the immortal is indestructible, must not the soul, if she is immortal, be also imperishable? Most certainly. Then, when death attacks a man, the mortal portion of him may be supposed to die, but the immortal retires at the approach of death and is preserved safe and sound? True. Then, Sebes, beyond question, the soul is immortal and imperishable, and our souls will truly exist in another world. I am convinced, Socrates, said Sebes, and have nothing more to object. But if my friend Simmias or anyone else has any further objection to make, he had better speak out, and not keep silence, since I do not know to what other reason he can defer the discussion, if there is anything which he wants to say or to have said. But I have nothing more to say, replied Simmias, nor can I see any reason for doubt after what has been said. But I still feel, and cannot help feeling, uncertain in my own mind when I think of the greatness of the subject and the feebleness of man. Yes, Simmias, replied Socrates, that is well said, and I may add that first principles, even if they appear certain, should be carefully considered, and when they are satisfactorily ascertained, then, with a sort of hesitating confidence in human reason, you may, I think, follow the course of the argument, and if that be plain and clear, there will be no need for any further inquiry. Very true. But then, O my friends, he said, if the soul is really immortal, what care should be taken of her, not only in respect of the portion of time which is called life, but of eternity, and the danger of neglecting her from this point of view does indeed appear to be awful. If that had only been the end of all, the wicked world would have had a good bargain in dying, for they would have been happily quit not only of their body, but of their own evil together with their souls. But now, inasmuch as the soul is manifestly immortal, there is no release or salvation from evil except the attainment of the highest virtue and wisdom. For the soul, when on her progress to the world below, takes nothing with her but nurture and education, and these are said greatly to benefit or greatly to injure the departed at the very beginning of his journey thither. For after death, as they say, the genius of each individual to whom he belonged in life leads him to a certain place in which the dead are gathered together, whence after judgment has been given they pass into the world below, following the guide who is appointed to conduct them from this world to the other, and when they have there received their due and remained their time, another guide brings them back again, and after many revolutions of ages. Now this way to the other world is not, as Aeschylus says in the Telephus, a single and straight path. If that were so, no guide would be needed, for no one could miss it. But there are many partings of the road and wendings, as I infer from that rites and sacrifices which are offered to the gods below in places where three ways meet on earth. The wise and orderly soul follows in the straight path and is conscious of her surroundings. But the soul which desires the body, and which, as I was relating before, has long been fluttering about the lifeless frame and the world of sight, is after many struggles and many sufferings, hardly and with violence carried away by her attendant genius. And when she arrives at the place where the other souls are gathered, if she be impure and have done impure deeds, whether foul murders or other crimes which are the brothers of this and the works of all brothers in crime, from that soul every one flees and turns away. No one will be her companion, no one her guide, but alone she wanders in extremity of evil until certain times are fulfilled, and when they are fulfilled, she is borne irresistibly to her own fitting habitation, as every pure and just soul which has passed through life in the company and under the guidance of the gods has also her own proper home. Now the earth has diverse wonderful regions, and is indeed in nature and extent very unlike the notions of geographers, as I believe on the authority of one who shall be nameless. What do you mean, Socrates? Said Simmias. I have myself heard many descriptions of the earth, but I do not know, and I should very much like to know, in which of these you put faith. And I, Simmias, replied Socrates, if I had the art of Glaucus, would tell you, although I know not that the art of Glaucus could prove the truth of my tale, which I myself should never be able to prove, and even if I could, I fear, Simmias, that my life would come to an end before the argument was completed. I may describe to you, however, the form and regions of the earth according to my conception of them. That, said Simmias, will be enough. Well, then, he said, my conviction is that the earth is a round body in the center of the heavens, and therefore has no need of air or of any similar force to be a support, but is kept there and hindered from falling or inclining any way by the equability of the surrounding heaven and by her own equipoise. For that which, being in equipoise, is in the center of that which is equably diffused, will not incline any way in any degree, but will always remain in the same state and not deviate. And this is my first notion, with which is surely a correct one, said Simmias. Also, I believe that the earth is very vast, and that we who dwell in the region extending from the river Phasis to the pillars of Heracles inhabit a small portion only about the sea, like ants or frogs about a marsh, and that there are other inhabitants of many other like places, for everywhere on the face of the earth there are hollows of various forms and sizes, into which the water and the mist and the lower air collect. But the true earth is pure and situated in the pure heaven. There are the stars also, and it is the heaven which is commonly spoken of by us as the ether, and of which our own earth is the sediment gathering in the hollows beneath. But we who live in these hollows are deceived into the notion that we are dwelling above on the surface of the earth, which is just as if a creature who was at the bottom of the sea were to fancy that he was on the surface of the water, and that the sea was the heaven through which he saw the sun and the other stars, he having never come to the surface by reason of his feebleness and sluggishness, and having never lifted up his head and seen, nor ever heard from one who hath seen, how much purer and fairer the world above is than his own. And such is exactly our case, for we are dwelling in a hollow of the earth, and fancy that we are on the surface, and the air we call the heaven, in which we imagine that the stars move. But the fact is that owing to our feebleness and sluggishness, we are prevented from reaching the surface of the earth. For if any man could arrive at the exterior limit, or take the wings of a bird and come to the top, then, like a fish who put his head out of the water and sees this world, he would see a world beyond. And if the nature of man could sustain the sight, he would acknowledge that this other world was the place of the true heaven and the true light and the true earth, for our earth and the stones and the entire region which surrounds us are spoiled and corroded, as in the sea all things are corroded by the rain. Neither is there any noble or perfect growth, but caverns only, and sand, and an endless slough of mud, and even the shore is not to be compared to the fairer sights of this world, and this still less in this our world to be compared with the other. Of that upper earth which is under the heaven, I can tell you a charming tale, Simmias, which is well worth hearing. And we, Socrates, replied Simmias, shall be charmed to listen to you. The tale, my friend, he said, is as follows. In the first place, the earth, when looked at from above, is in appearance strict like one of those balls which have leather coverings in 12 pieces, and is decked with various colors, of which the colors used by painters on earth are in a manner samples, but there the whole earth is made up of them, and they are brighter far and clearer than ours. There is a purple of wonderful lustre, also the radiance of the gold, and the white which is in the earth is whiter than any chalk or snow. Of this and other colors the earth is made up, and they are more in number and fairer than the eye of man has ever seen. The very hollows of which I was speaking, filled with air and water, have a color of their own, and are seen like light gleaming amid the diversity of other colors, so that the whole presents a single and continuous appearance of variety in unity. And in this fair region everything that grows, trees and flowers and fruits, are in a like degree fairer than any here, and there are hills having stones in them in a like degree smoother and more transparent and fairer in color than are highly valued emeralds and sardonyxes and jaspers and other gems, which are but minute fragments of them, for there all the stones are like our precious stones and fairer still. The reason is that there they are pure, and not like our precious stones, infected or corroded by the corrupt briny elements which can coagulate among us, and which breathe foulness and disease both in earth and stones, as well as in animals and plants. They are the jewels of the upper earth, which also shines with gold and silver and the like, and they are set in the light of day and are large and abundant, and in all places, making the earth a sight to gladden the beholder's eye. And there are animals and men, some in a middle region, others dwelling about the earth as we dwell about the sea, others in islands which the air flows round near the continent, and in a word, the air is used by them as the water and the sea are by us, and the ether is to them what the air is to us. Moreover, the temperament of their seasons is such that they have no disease, and live much longer than we do, and have sight and hearing and smell and all the other senses in far greater perfection, in the same proportion that air is purer than water, or the ether than air. Also they have temples and sacred places in which the gods really dwell, and they hear their voices and receive their answers, and are conscious of them and hold converse with them, and they see the sun, moon, and stars as they truly are, and their other blessedness is of a piece with us. Such is the nature of the whole earth, and of the things which are around the earth, and there are diverse regions in the hollows on the face of the globe everywhere, some of them deeper and more extended than that which we inhabit, others deeper but with a narrower opening than ours, and some are shallower and also wider. All have numerous perforations, and there are passages up broad and narrow in the interior of the earth, connecting them with one another, and there flows out of and into them, as into basins, a vast tide of water and huge subterranean streams of perennial rivers and springs, hot and cold, and a great fire, and great rivers of fire, and streams of liquid mud, tin or thick, like the rivers of mud in Sicily, and the lava streams which follow them, and the regions about which they happen to flow are filled up with them, and there is a swinging or seesaw in the interior of the earth which moves all this up and down, and is due to the following cause. There is a chasm which is the base test of them all and pierces right through the whole earth. This is that chasm which Homer describes in the words, "Far off there is the inmost depth beneath the earth," and which he in other places and many other poets have called Tartarus. And the seesaw is caused by the streams flowing into and out of this chasm, and they each have the nature of the soil through which they flow. And the reason why the streams are always flowing in and out is that the watery element has no bed or bottom, but is swinging and surging up and down, and the surrounding wind and air do the same. They follow the water up and down, hither and thither over the earth. Just as in the act of respiration, the air is always in process of inhalation and exhalation, and the wind swinging with the water in and out produces fearful and irresistible blasts. When the waters retire with a rush into the lower parts of the earth, as they are called, they flow through the earth in those regions and fill them up like water raised by a pump. And then, when they leave those regions and rush back hither, they again fill the hollows here, and when these are filled, flow through subterranean channels and find their way to their several places, forming seas and lakes and rivers and springs. Thence they again enter the earth, some of them making a long circuit into many lands, others going to a few places and not so distant, and again fall into Tartarus, some at a point a good deal lower than that at which they rose, and at others not much lower, but all in some degree lower than the point from which they came, and some burst forth again on the opposite side, and some on the same side, and some went round the earth with one or many folds like these coils of a serpent, and descend as far as they can, but always return and fall into the chasm. The rivers flowing in either direction can descend only to the center and no further, for opposite to the rivers is a precipice. Now these rivers are many and mighty and diverse, and there are four principal ones, of which the greatest and outermost is that called Oceanus, which flows round the earth in a circle, and in the opposite direction flows Creon, which passes under the earth through desert places into the Acherusian lake. This is the lake to the shores of which the souls of the many go when they are dead, and after waiting an appointed time, which is to some a longer and to some a shorter time, they are sent back to be born again as animals,